Hi, I'm Bob Henrickson, and I'm sitting at the base of our Nebraska state tree, the eastern cottonwood. And I'm sitting here for a reason. I want to talk to you today. Here we are in the middle of the winter time about beautiful bark. And what better specimen to have bark that just reaches out and grabs you than the eastern cottonwood. But if you come along with me on a tour here, I'm on the University of Nebraska East Campus at the Maxwell Arboretum. And we're going to walk around and look at some trees that have some real cool bark. So if you're planning on growing or planting trees this year, consider trees that have really cool bark. You'll be glad you did. Come on, let's go for a little tour. Hey, I like trees for a lot of reasons, but you know, bark is in the wintertime is really one of the coolest features of a tree. And this is one of my all-time favorite trees for its bark. It's the Kentucky coffee tree, a native tree to Nebraska, and actually a tree promoted through both our Great Plants program and Retree Nebraska. So this tree belongs in Nebraska. Awesome bark, like it's been armor plated to protect the tree against the elements. And this one's gone to the extreme. Very coarse texture in the wintertime. And silhouetted against the low angle of the sun, it just really stands out, and especially with snow on the ground, the bark even jumps out at you more. Beautiful branch structure, almost a scary looking tree to kids in the wintertime because of its rough and tumble texture. So Kentucky coffee tree, an awesome tree to plant for bark. Hey, I'm standing beside another tree with some really cool bark. This is also a native tree, or a tree that grows naturally in Nebraska, but not only is it native, it's just got incredible gnarly bark. You know, it's something about native trees that, you know, you better make some rough, tough bark or you're not going to make it in this tough area in Nebraska. But the one thing that's neat about hackberry bark, I've heard it described as warty. You know, it gets these intense ridges on it coming up off the plant. But those ridges, I've also learned, thanks to Dave Henrickson, he gave me a great tip. If you're a bird feeder and you feed your birds with suet feeders, he said the bark of a hackberry is one of the best suet feeders he's found. He simply takes suet and rubs it in between these ridges. And then the little nuthatches or the downy woodpeckers will work in there and take that suet out of the ridges. Brilliant. So not only can you have a tree with cool bark, you can use the bark too. Let's go look at another one. Oh good, here's one of my favorite trees. Hey, this is a river birch tree, one of the best birch trees to grow in Nebraska. By best, I mean the easiest to grow. Not all birch trees do very well in Nebraska, but the river birch sure does. And it's got some really interesting bark. It's not the typical white bark birch tree that you may know. This is more of a, we call it a rust or a salmon color. And they peel off in these thin papery sheets to exfoliate, literally. It doesn't hurt the tree at all. But these papery sheets peel off to expose the lighter colored bark underneath. It really gives the tree a cool, shaggy appearance. So you want that shaggy dog and bark up that tree? Well, you won't bark up the wrong tree with this one. This is an awesome tree for its bark, the river birch. Let's go look at a few more. Hey, when you think trees and you think trees with cool bark, what comes to mind? Birch trees, right? Oh, how can you beat the beautiful pale white bark of a birch tree? This birch tree is called Himalayan birch, which isn't easy to find, but still a great birch tree for Nebraska. There's European white birch trees, Japanese white spire birch, the paper birch tree. All of them have white bark, which is a great attribute. One thing to remember when birch trees is they don't like it too hot and windy. A good rule of thumb is they like to have their roots in the shade and their hair in the sun. So plant a birch tree and look out for that magnificent bark. Awesome tree. Isn't it fun to just love trees? This tree is so cool. This is a lace bark pine tree, one of the best for bark. I mean, do I have to say any more? I think it speaks for itself. This is actually the largest lace bark pine tree, the state champion in Nebraska. This is on East Campus here at the University of Nebraska. Has been here for many years. But look at the interesting, we call it almost a camouflage pattern that develops, and as the bark peels away, it reveals lighter colors underneath that eventually turn the darker grays. But you get greens and grays, olive greens, this whole different variations of colors that gives it that camouflage look. The lace bark pine, one of the most beautiful trees you can plant for bark. Hey, here's another tree. Look at this one. Look at the bark on this tree. It's so smooth like a baby's bottom, or elephant skin. It's not quite as smooth as a baby's bottom, but still smooth compared to some of the other trees we've looked at. We've looked at some trees that have some real gnarly, ridged, furrowed bark, but this American yellowwood tree is noted for its very smooth bark. I mean, just really interesting and textured and carries all the way up into the branches, into the tips. If you want a tree that has interesting, smooth bark, go no further than the American yellowwood. Just a fantastic tree to plant, and certainly deserves to be planted more, the American yellowwood. Have you hugged a tree today? Ha ha, I have. Oh, one of the best trees for wintertime bark, folks, the American sycamore. How can you leave this tree off the list? It should be on everybody's favorite tree for winter bark. The base of the tree has this dark bark on it, but as you go further up the tree, this dark bark kind of flakes off to reveal the white, beautiful, creamy white undersides, and it gives it kind of that two-toned effect on great big old sycamores like this one. One of the best trees for wintertime bark, the American sycamore. Hey, here's another tree we found in the woods here at East Campus and Maxwell Arboretum. Awesome tree for bark. This is the American persimmon tree. And the bark is often described by people as alligator back pattern. Kind of looks like the back of an alligator, I guess, if you squint your eyes and dream a little bit. Either way, it's a really neat, gnarly bark with these big ridges and furrows in between the ridges that almost give it a diamond or a blocky pattern. The American persimmon, one of the best for bark. Awesome tree. Hey, we've been talking about birch trees and their beautiful white bark, but boy, this is no slouch for its beautiful bark either. This is a quaking aspen tree. Actually, the quaking aspen is native to Nebraska. It grows naturally up along the Niobrara River. But boy, the quaking aspen just has beautiful bark. Not as bright of a white as a birch tree, a white-barked birch tree. We call this more of a grayish white or a greenish white even, but still very stunning and beautiful in the winter landscape, especially backdrop against evergreen trees. And they grow in groves like this, and you can keep them in groves by surrounding it with wood chip mulch and then keeping them confined and letting them grow just like they want to grow naturally in groves. So consider the aspen tree if you want a tree with some really outstanding winter bark, one of the best. Hey, you heard the expression barking up the wrong tree. Well, I'm doing anything but barking up the wrong tree. I'm barking up the right tree. This is the common bald cypress, a tree that does very well in Nebraska. And in fact, this tree I'm sitting in is the largest bald cypress in the state champion. This tree's been growing here since the 1930s. But what a magnificent tree for winter bark. It's got this unusual oval-shaped branch, but as the bark peels away, the older bark, it reveals kind of a beautiful cinnamon color underneath, so you get that two-tone color on the bark. Really fun tree for winter bark and winter branch structure, the common bald cypress. Plant it, you'll be glad you did. I'm getting down from here. I like to get down and dirty with trees. Hey, I'm down here low hanging out with my low-branched friend here. This is an awesome tree to plant for wintertime bark. Even though this tree's got low branches, it's still really cool when you look at it up close. This is the bark of a Cornelian cherry dogwood. Yes, a dogwood tree. You call it a big bush, whatever. Either way, it grows into a small tree. This is the 2009 Great Plants for the Great Plains Tree of the Year. For more information about this tree, you can go to arboretum.unl.edu. But either way, here you get a good look at the bark. Really interesting peeling bark that really reveals a two-tone color here, and really shows off the spectacular beauty of this plant. A good four-season plant, the Cornelian cherry dogwood. Plant it for its bark and other things too. We'll see you later. Here's another tree I want to show you that has some really gnarly bark. But if you look at it at this young age, you kind of think, well, what's so cool about this bark, Bob? Come on. Well, we call this shaggy bark. This is a shagbark hickory. And as this tree gets older, more and more of this bark will peel off in these long plates to give it its common name, the shagbark hickory. But first of all, it's just an awesome tree to plant in the landscape. It deserves to be planted more. But one of the main reasons you need to plant it is for its bark, one of the best. So consider shagbark hickory. You'll be glad you did.